It began, as these things often do, with a sense of emptiness. Not in my soul, I wasn't that poetic, but in my apartment. After Clara left, taking with her the photos, the ridiculously expensive coffee machine, and the very scent of life that had once filled the rooms, I was left with echoes and bare walls. I'm Leo, a researcher at the university, a man who organizes his life around data and verifiable facts. My world was one of peer-reviewed articles and archival records, a place where every mystery had a footnote leading to an answer. My own home, however, had become an unsolvable equation of silence. To combat this, I took to haunting the old antique shops downtown on Saturdays. I convinced myself I was looking for character, for pieces with history that could fill the void Clara had left. I wasn't looking for ghosts. I was looking for furniture. My skepticism was a fortress, the foundation of my identity. I believed in faulty wiring, drafts, and the tricks an exhausted mind can play on itself. The supernatural was a genre of fiction, not a chapter of reality. That's what I believed the day I found the mirror. It was tucked away in the back of a cluttered shop that smelled of decaying paper and furniture polish, a place run by a stooped old man with cataracts that made his eyes look like misty moons. The mirror was magnificent and imposing, a full-length monolith framed in dark, intricately carved wood that twisted into shapes of leaves and what looked unsettlingly like grasping fingers. The silvering was tarnished, with dark spots blooming like mold beneath the surface, but it didn't look broken. It looked ancient. "It has a long history, this one," the owner rasped, wiping a sleeve across its dusty surface. "Came from an old estate in the mountains. They said it watched the family for generations." I smiled politely at his sales pitch. "It's a beautiful piece." I saw my reflection, a tired man in his late 30s with the beginnings of gray at his temples, looking small and insignificant within the grand, dark frame. It would be perfect for the empty wall in my hallway, a statement piece. I paid his surprisingly low asking price, and 2 days later, it was mounted opposite my front door. For the first week, it was just a mirror. It reflected the light from the living room, made the narrow hallway seem larger, and served its purpose. My routine remained unchanged. Wake up, coffee, university library, home, microwave dinner, read, sleep. A life of quiet, controlled solitude. I had control over my reality. The first crack in that reality was almost imperceptible. I was walking out of my bedroom, and in the reflection, I saw a flicker of movement behind me. I spun around. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I turned back to the mirror, and my reflection stood there, perfectly still. I chalked it up to a floater in my eye, a trick of the light. My new life was stressful, and I wasn't sleeping well. Rational explanations were my comfort. A few days later, a second crack appeared. I was standing in front of the mirror, fixing my tie for work. The shadow cast by the mirror on the wall behind me, illuminated by the overhead light, seemed wrong. It was subtle, a matter of inches, but its shape didn't quite match the ornate frame. The carved wooden fingers of the frame were static, but in the shadow, they seemed to be reaching, elongated and thin. I stepped to the side, and the shadow shifted with the changing angle of the light, snapping back to a normal shape. "I need a vacation," I mumbled, turning away and dismissing the thought. But the seed of unease had been planted. I started noticing other things, a sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature whenever I walked past the mirror, a faint, almost inaudible whispering sound, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, that would cease the moment I tried to locate its source. I checked the window frames for drafts, the wiring for faults. I found nothing. The true turning point came on a Thursday night. I was in the living room, engrossed in a book, the only light coming from my reading lamp. The hallway was dark. I glanced up, my eyes drawn to the doorway for no particular reason, and I saw it. The shadow of the mirror was cast on the far wall by the ambient city light filtering through the window, a dark rectangle in the gloom. But there was another shadow within it, a tall, slender silhouette of a man. It was standing right where I would have been had I been in front of the mirror. My blood ran cold. The book slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. I was frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was in the living room. The shadow was in the hallway. It was impossible. I slowly rose from my chair, my legs trembling. As I took a hesitant step towards the hallway, the silhouette on the wall turned its head, a slow, deliberate motion. It had no features, it was just a void of blackness, but I felt its gaze on me. I blinked, and it was gone. The shadow on the wall was just the inert shape of the mirror frame once more. I stood there for nearly an hour, drenched in sweat, before I found the courage to turn on every single light in the apartment. The fortress of my skepticism was beginning to crumble. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Every creak of the old building was the entity. Every shadow in the corner of my eye was its form taking shape. I became obsessed. During the day, I tried to function, but my mind was consumed by the mirror in the hallway. I started my investigation, clinging to the hope of a rational explanation. Perhaps the glass was warped, or the silvering contained strange chemicals that reacted to light and temperature. I searched the mirror's frame for a maker's mark, a name, anything. On the back, pressed against the wall, my fingers traced a small, strange symbol carved into the wood. It wasn't a signature. It was a sigil, a complex knot of lines and curves I'd never seen before. My research skills, usually applied to 18th century manuscripts, were now focused on this single, terrifying clue. I took a photo of the sigil and spent hours online, cross-referencing it with databases of Masonic symbols, alchemical signs, and carpentry guilds. Nothing. I decided to return to the antique shop to demand answers from the old man who sold me this cursed object. But when I arrived, the shop was gone. The windows were papered over, a faded "for lease" sign taped to the glass. It was as if the place had never existed. Panic set in. I was alone with this thing. Desperate, I widened my search, plunging into the darker corners of the internet, forums dedicated to the occult, paranormal investigation, and obscure history. I posted the image of the sigil with a vague story about a family heirloom. For days, I got nothing but crackpot theories and trolls. Then, a private message appeared in my inbox. The username was Archivista, and the message was chillingly direct. Get rid of the mirror, if you still can. My hands shook as I typed a reply, begging for more information. The user, who introduced himself as Professor Carvalho, a retired historian specializing in regional folklore and esoteric societies, responded a few hours later. He recognized the sigil. It belonged to a small, wealthy spiritualist circle that was active in the mountains of Santa Catarina in the late 19th century. They weren't interested in contacting spirits. They were interested in trapping them. They dabbled in rituals far darker than simple seances. According to Carvalho's research, pieced together from old police records and a surviving member's diary, they created an object they called the espelho do outro, the mirror of the other. It wasn't designed to reflect the user, but to house an entity, a shade, as the diary called it, a soul echo. They succeeded once, Carvalho wrote. They trapped something, but they couldn't control it. The diary describes it as a collector of solitude, a parasitic shadow that feeds on the loneliness of the mirror's owner. It covets a life it cannot have. I read the words over and over, the screen glowing in my dark apartment. A collector of solitude. The phrase echoed the hollow feeling I'd been trying to fill. Carvalho went on to detail the fates of the mirror's previous known owners. A reclusive painter who was found dead in his locked studio, having apparently slashed all his own canvases and then himself. A widow who simply vanished from her home, leaving behind a half-eaten meal. A family who fled their house in the middle of the night, telling police they were being erased. This was the moment the floor gave way beneath me. This was the pure, undiluted terror of understanding. I wasn't being haunted by a ghost. I was being preyed upon by a prisoner that wanted my life for its own. It started by mimicking the host's shadow, Carvalho explained, a way of learning and anchoring itself. Then, it would begin to assert its own form, growing stronger on the owner's fear and isolation, weakening their presence in the world. It didn't want me dead. It wanted to replace me. There was no easy escape. I needed to tell someone. I called my best friend, Daniel, the anchor of rationality in my life. He listened patiently as I spilled the entire story, the shadow, the sigil, the professor. His response was exactly what I should have expected. "Leo, man, are you okay?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "This breakup with Clara has hit you harder than you're letting on. You're exhausted, you're stressed, your brain is playing tricks on you." "Daniel, this is real," I insisted, my voice cracking. "I saw it." "You saw a shadow," he countered gently. "You're living in an old building. You bought a creepy old mirror. You're letting your imagination run wild. Please, just get some sleep. Maybe take some time off work." After I hung up, the silence of the apartment was heavier than ever. Daniel's skepticism, once a shared worldview, now felt like a wall between us. He thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. But as I looked down the darkened hallway, I saw the shadow figure standing there again. No longer just on the wall, but in the space itself. It was a column of absolute black, darker than the surrounding gloom. It was taller than me, gaunt, with arms that hung too long at its sides. It wasn't my reflection, it was my replacement. And I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The entity no longer bothered with subtlety. The fragile truce was broken. The shadow was now a constant silent occupant of my apartment. I would wake up in the dead of night, a primal fear snapping me from a restless sleep, and I would see it. It would be standing at the foot of my bed, a motionless silhouette against the moonlit window, its presence a vortex that sucked all warmth from the room. It had no face, no features, but I felt its focus on me, a cold, analytical attention. It was studying me, learning. Its campaign was one of psychological erosion. It began to manipulate my home, turning my sanctuary into a weapon against me. It would whisper my name, Leo, from the walls, a dry, sibilant sound like snakeskin over sand. I'd be in the kitchen, and a book would fall from the shelf in the living room. I'd find my research papers, once meticulously organized, scattered across the floor in patterns that almost formed symbols. The world inside the mirror grew more menacing. My own reflection was often delayed, lagging a half-second behind my movements. Sometimes the reflection of my apartment would be wrong. A chair would be overturned, the walls would be stained with damp, or worse, the shadow figure would be reflected standing in a doorway behind me, even when the room itself was empty. My attempts to fight back were pathetically futile. My first instinct was to simply remove the source. I threw a heavy blanket over the mirror, a childish attempt to blind it. The next morning, I found the blanket folded neatly on the floor beside it. My frustration boiled over into a desperate rage. I grabbed a hammer from my toolbox, determined to smash the cursed thing to pieces. But as I approached, a wave of nauseating cold and a crushing, debilitating despair washed over me. My muscles locked. The hammer felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and my mind was flooded with a singular, overwhelming thought. It's hopeless. The feeling was so powerful it brought me to my knees, gasping for air until I finally crawled away. I tried to get it out of the apartment. I put on work gloves and tried to lift it off the heavy-duty hooks I had mounted. It wouldn't budge. It was as if the mirror had fused with the wall, its wooden frame having grown into the plaster. I pulled until my muscles screamed and my fingers were raw, but it was immovable. I emailed Professor Carvalho in a panic. His reply came quickly. "It has anchored itself. The mirror is no longer just in your home. Your home is now part of the mirror. You are both in its prison." My sanity frayed and snapped. Sleep deprivation left me with shaking hands and a permanent tremor of fear. I couldn't focus at the library. The long, silent rows of bookshelves felt threatening, every shadow a potential hiding place for my tormentor. I started seeing it outside the apartment, a tall, dark figure standing across the street, the silhouette of a man with unnaturally long limbs in a distant window. Was it real, or was I now projecting my terror onto the world? I no longer knew. I stopped answering Daniel's calls. How could I explain that I was afraid of my own shadow? I was a ship taking on water, and my connections to the rational world were the last lifelines I was cutting myself. I was becoming as isolated and solitary as the creature wanted me to be. It was starving me of everything that made me human, preparing to step into the empty shell. The final email from Professor Carvalho felt like a death sentence and a last, desperate prayer. He had found a fragment in the diary, a frantic, barely legible entry from the society's leader, written shortly before he took his own life. It was about severing the connection. The shade mimics the self, it read. It is a parasite on the reflection. The glass is its cage. The reflection is its key. One must not break the cage, but shatter the key. Shatter the key. Shatter the reflection. Not the mirror, but my own image within it. It was a riddle born of madness, but it was all I had left. That night, I knew it would be the end. The atmosphere in the apartment was electric with malice. The whispering was constant, a chorus of dry static from all directions. The cold was so intense I could see my breath. I walked into the hallway and stood before my prison. My reflection was pale and gaunt, my eyes wide with terror. Behind my image in the glass, the shadow thing was stirring. It wasn't on the wall or in the room anymore. It was inside the mirror, detaching itself from my reflection's back like a tar-black creature being born. It grew, its form becoming more solid, more three-dimensional, its long, skeletal fingers pressing against the glass from the other side. It was coming for me. It was breaking through. Carvalho's words echoed in my mind, not the cage, the key. I ignored the rising horror behind my own image. I forced myself to look into my own eyes, into the reflection of the man I used to be, the skeptic, the academic, the person who believed in a logical world. I had to destroy him to survive. With a guttural scream that was equal parts terror, grief, and defiance, I drew back my fist and smashed it with all my strength into my own reflected face. The impact was explosive. The glass didn't shatter into 1,000 pieces, but a network of deep cracks radiated from the point of impact, right over my reflected eye. A soundless shriek tore through the apartment, a psychic shockwave of pure agony and rage that threw me backward onto the floor. The shadow thing in the mirror convulsed violently, its form distorting as if being ripped apart. With a final violent implosion, it was sucked back into the fractured depths of the glass. And then, silence. The oppressive cold vanished. The whispering ceased. The air was still and blessedly, terrifyingly normal. I survived. The next day, I called 2 movers, strong men who grunted and complained about the mirror's unnatural weight. But they managed to wrench it from the wall, leaving behind deep gouges in the plaster. I paid them extra to take it to the city dump and never speak of it again. I never knew if they did. I didn't care. It was gone. Life has returned to a fragile new equilibrium. I still work at the university. I still eat microwave dinners. But I am not the man I was. I am a survivor, marked by a wound no one can see. My apartment is filled with lamps, and they are never turned off. I have a deep, instinctual fear of reflective surfaces. I remove the bathroom cabinet, and I shave using a tiny, cheap plastic mirror that I keep face down when not in use. The reflection of myself is now the face of a stranger I dare not meet. But the worst scar is the knowledge, the certainty that the veil between our world and the next is thin and fragile, and that things are listening from the other side. Professor Carvalho sent one last email after I told him what I had done. You broke the prison, but you did not destroy the prisoner. An entity like that is not so easily unmade. You only shattered its anchor. It is free now, but incomplete. Be careful, Leo. It will always be looking for the piece of itself it lost, the part of you it remembers. And so I live in my brightly lit world, forever looking over my shoulder. Sometimes when I'm sitting in my armchair, I'll catch a glimpse of my own shadow cast on the wall. And for a heart-stopping, icy moment, I'll see it move independently of me. A finger will twitch. The head will tilt slightly. It always snaps back into a normal shape when I look directly at it. But I know what I see. The horror is no longer in the mirror, it's attached to me. I didn't just survive. I became the haunted house,